I just want to introduce Seth. Seth Benz is currently heads up the Schoodic Bird Ecology Program at Acadia National Park, where he combines research and education on bird migration with the study of nature's sequencing of events, or phenology, which engages people of all ages in citizen science. Seth has worked at Hawk Mountain Sanctuary in Pennsylvania, Hog Island Audubon Camp in Muscongas Bay, where I first met him, Audubon Expedition Institute, Project Puffin, and Acadia National Park. He's the compiler of 2 Christmas bird counts, a regional coordinator for the Maine Breeding Bird Atlas, and author of the Waldo County chapter in the new book, Birdwatching in Maine, a Sight Guide. Having grown up in eastern Pennsylvania, Seth now lives in Belfast, Maine, where he launched bird bus tours for the city and serves as a volunteer for the Belfast Bay Watershed Coalition. And by the way, as an advisor for Signs of the Seasons, I might add. So thank you so much, Seth, for joining us. And I am going to turn over my screen to you.
I think you just have to turn on the presentation now.
Where do I do that?
And then just swap your display. Move your mouse down here.
Yeah, your cursor was on it. The top, top left, yeah.
There it is.
Yeah. There you go. Thank you.
All right. Sorry about that technical difficulty. Welcome, everybody, and thank you for tuning in. I am speaking to you from the Schoodic Point on the quiet side of Acadia National Park. Visitation to this part of the park is about 1/10 of what the Bar Harbor side receives. Think a couple of 100,000 here on the Schoodic side to several million over there annually. Schoodic Institute's postal location is Winter Harbor, Maine. Formerly, the facility that I'm speaking to you from was a secretive U.S. Navy base that worked to track submarines and other vessels that moved through the North Atlantic Ocean. The base was decommissioned in 2002. Shortly thereafter, the Institute was born, and the facility was renovated to become a research and learning center, which is one of 19 across the United States on federal lands. We have a working agreement with the U.S. National Park Service and Acadia National Park. However, the Institute itself is an independent nonprofit organization. The work we do, other than the glimpse I will provide you with today about the bird ecology program, includes forest ecology, intertidal ecology, and educational research and facilitation. Much of our collective work is done locally within Acadia National Park, but our many partnerships and professional affiliations give us a reach that extends across the state, the country, and internationally. Our work is spearheaded by just a few employees, but would not be remotely possible were it not for volunteers and students, field technicians, visiting researchers, and the guidance of our board of directors and science advisors. We are also a conference center. Perhaps some of you have visited here. And the conference center hosts a wide diversity of groups that come here to advance their work in this inspirational setting on the edge of the ocean. So today I'll talk to you about advancing phenology, tracking changes of birds, bugs, and select plants in the Acadia region. We carefully monitor and collect data on the timing of nature's events. From observations of individual organisms to the sometimes intricate dance of species interactions across habitats, we are advancing ecosystem science by engaging people of all ages in our work. The context of that work is outlined, sadly, by an ever-growing list of stressors that drive home the lesson that we humans are part of nature, and our role as conservation stewards is increasingly complex and perhaps more important than ever. In what we term rapid environmental change, we see advances in frequency of erratic weather, greater rainfall, incidences of coastal flooding are on the increase. We've all been hearing lately about insect-borne diseases. Invasive species are a problem in the park as well as outside of the park. For years, everyone thought that the air at Acadia National Park was quite pristine, but because of monitoring that's been going on for over 30 years, we know that we sit at the end of a pipeline from the industrial areas to our west, which deposit their air and air particles on our pristine environment here along the coast of Maine. And so we see deteriorating air quality. And of course, we're all experiencing warmer temperatures, or warming temperatures, and the Gulf of Maine, the body of water that surrounds this peninsula, is no exception. It is the second highest or warmest body of water in the oceans of the world, according to some researchers. However, we're fortunate here at Acadia National Park to have a solid historical track record with which to compare and contrast our current work. People who have gone before, the founders of the park, have been monitoring things for quite some time, and we're able to look back to Henry David Thoreau's work down in Concord, Massachusetts. Comparing those things, we find out that Acadia has lost 18% of its plant species. And through our work doing bioblitzes and things, we know that for the past 12 years, we've gained 525 new insect species. These are remarkable statistics. Of course, the fisheries have collapsed, and tourism and development have increased, which is changing the environment. And the park itself has recently come out with a new transportation policy and is implementing that, and we're still in a public time frame to receive your comments about what is going on or how you might experience the park in the future. Evidence of past change is everywhere written into the landscape, and we have excelled as a species to read deeply and to interpret it. We have now sophisticated ways of teasing out the nuances, analyzing and calculating a plethora of metrics, and from that we are extrapolating new perspectives on a changing world. What lies ahead? This question provides a foundation of motivation for our work here. We want to anticipate the future. There is something human about thinking that we know, predicting, projecting, all of that sort of stuff. However, we must carry out our work in the now, observing and measuring the present to gain insights into how to unravel the mysteries of the future. Observers of phenology, such as yourselves, are essential to this quest. Here at the Bird Ecology Lab, our work is year-round. My passion is in the bird world. Finding a catbird nest before I was 10 years old unleashed a spark of inquisitiveness that keeps me going even today. I think about questions such as, when do certain birds return? How far have they traveled? Where will they nest? How can we find out more about individual birds? What do they eat? And on, the questions just keep flowing. Seeking answers to ordinary questions like this deepens the work that I have been privileged to do and remain a part of. Now, to get at these things and to do the monitoring, of course, there are physical tools such as binoculars and spotting scopes, identification by sight and sound field guides, night vision goggles, bird detecting radar, acoustic recorders, and so on. But some very cool, field perfected data collection apps have replaced clipboards and data sheets for the most part. iNaturalist, as you may know, is about cataloging biodiversity. It's a citizen science tool that allows users to share pictures of organisms. Then those pictures become a record of an organism in a place at a specific time. And through time and collection of these observations, we can begin to say a lot about what is where and when, what is changing and how. And so we go on to a couple of other apps. Nature's Notebook, you all should be familiar with this, is observing phenological change in time and space. It's a citizen science tool that allows people to go back to the same place, the same target organisms, and observe the subtleties of life cycle change. These data can be compared over time or from place to place. And then eBird, an app that I happen to work with almost on a daily basis, is about capturing bird observations, presence, abundance, location, and behavior. It's a citizen science tool that allows people to share their observation lists when they go out birding. And then this becomes a powerful tool for understanding when birds are where and what they are doing. In fact, this year, 2018, is the year of the bird, celebrating the Migratory Bird Treaty Act that was enacted 100 years ago. And to sort of celebrate that and kick that off, the Maine Inland Fisheries and Wildlife has launched a new modern breeding bird atlas project. We haven't had one since the late 70s into early 80s, so it's a time for a new one to take place. And we're doing that using an eBird portal for the Maine breeding bird atlas. And so all the recruits, all of the volunteers that are participating in that project will be using eBird to document now the breeding birds of the state of Maine. Or at least we're asking them to do so. For people who are not familiar with the app, there's still the old way of doing things where you carry data sheets into the field and mark down your observations there. But the breeding codes exist in the app, and it's quite an easy tool to use. So, hearkening to a couple of our projects, one of which is an iNaturalist project called Down East in Acadia, which encompasses and collects all submitted iNaturalist postings from Washington and Hancock counties. That's an area that's as large as the size of the state of Connecticut, and maybe even a tad larger when you include the water surrounding it. These observations can be by anyone who goes out and makes an observation. We are approaching our second anniversary of this project, just 2 years old, and here, depicted in this slide, are some of the statistics we have gained. In 2 years, nearly 15,000 observations have been made, and I can guarantee you that I last updated this on May the 20th, and I'm positive that that's already over 15,000. And that's documents 2,312 species in that geographic area that I spoke of. And 779 observers have contributed to that data. And then the right-hand column, which says ID providers, is a fascinating one to me because this means that anyone across the world who's interested in helping to identify the posted pictures or to verify identifications of posted pictures, they can get online and actually do this. And so 570 people who are not necessarily the observers that are in the column to the left, are helping to provide these identifications. And then you can see the rest of the statistics that are listed there for birds, plants, and insects. Again, that's limited to the geographical area of Hancock and Washington counties. And then we drill a little deeper into some of the eBird data, and I like to use a couple of examples. The first one being the eastern bluebird. Most everybody knows the bluebird, and everybody knows the sort of phrase, "It's a bluebird day." Well, consider the change that has occurred over the last 50 years or so. Here we are gleaning some findings from the eBird records for this species. Note that during the 30-year period from 67 to 97, the average annual arrival date for this species was May the 1st here in Maine. During the next 2 decades, that Maine arrival date is now earlier by 3 weeks. Interestingly, this species is one that is showing a trend of not traveling as far south in the winter as it used to. Instead, it's choosing to winter farther north, such that bluebirds will soon be found in Maine during every month of the year on a regular basis. This is some of the kind of information that we're gleaning from these apps that I spoke of before. And now here's a really startling example, especially to someone like me who has studied raptors for a good portion of my life. And currently I coordinate the Hawk Watch on top of Cadillac Mountain every autumn. So this example is of change and adaptation to warming seasonal and annual temperatures. Over a 5-decade span, Maine has gone from no reported eBird sightings of vultures in the entire state to an arrival date that is progressively earlier and earlier by the latest decade. Additionally, autumn Hawk Watch records of turkey vulture passing Cadillac Mountain show an increasing trend in the average annual count, and the last date of observation in the autumn of this species in a given year is now deep into October. So whereas birds weren't showing up, they didn't show up until the 80s with any kind of regularity, and that date of arrival was around June the 1st. Take this year for instance, when we saw the first vulture was reported on eBird on February 3rd in 2018. Quite the difference from no birds. This is a bird that is extending its range northward in a hurry. And then just a little bit more on the Hawk Watch, the hawk migration monitoring that we do at Cadillac Mountain, which has been ongoing since 1995. It is the longest sustained citizen science monitoring project in Acadia National Park. We watch and count from mid-August through October, and some of our more hardy volunteers make a trek up the mountain in November, especially on days that have promising winds out of the north. Cadillac is situated near the headwaters, so to speak, of an annual river of raptors that funnels south to spend the winter. Note the examples of species tallied at Cadillac in the left-hand column above. Then look at Cape May, New Jersey, which is in the mid-Atlantic states in terms of latitude. And then finally passing through Veracruz, Mexico on their way to destinations farther south. So whereas on a particular season where we saw 142 turkey vultures, that's for the whole season. At Cape May in one day they saw 1,003 turkey vultures pass by there. And at Veracruz, 378,000 birds pass by. Broad-winged hawks, a bird that nests in our mostly deciduous woods here in the state of Maine, not necessarily here on the Scudic Peninsula, but which is all coniferous. So we that particular year in 2014, we saw 646. Cape May, now turns out the broadwing is not a bird that necessarily goes down the coastal path. It sometimes follows, and most of the species goes down the Appalachian mountain chain. But look at the numbers when it gets to Veracruz, Mexico, 640,000. So that, I hope those statistics give you the sense that the birds just start their trickle up here at our latitude, and then birds from elsewhere are joining that throng of birds, sort of tributaries, if you will, pulling in, moving south till we get those big, big numbers far to our south. To me, these things are really impressive. The phenomenon of migration, we can see it right here in Maine if only we get to the right kinds of spots. So another migration project that we run here at the Scudic Institute is the waterbird migration count, conducted each autumn from Scudic Point itself. We call it Sea Watch because we see lots of birds, of course, and an occasional whale, and near daily sightings of porpoise and seals. All the identifiable migrants are counted, and so are the ones we have to list as unidentified, because sometimes they're too far out to be able to identify with a spotting scope or binoculars. And this activity, however, is not for the faint of heart. The count is conducted for the first 3 hours of daylight each day, and then again at the end of the day for the final 2 hours prior to sunset. And you can see back in 2016, our count exceeded 100,000 birds in a 2-month time frame. This kind of information allows us to gain insight into species population trends, as well as details such as flight composition in a given day or over the course of a month or a season, a week-long period, whatever you want to look at, the timing and flock flight dynamics. Now, this kind of information may be of useful importance to agencies that are interested in, say, properly locating water-based wind turbines, for example. So we're looking at the altitude above the water that these birds are traveling as well, and collecting that kind of data and passing it on to the agencies that are interested in that kind of information. We gain species insights as well on particular species. Here I've contrasted some information about red-throated loons with that of common loons, and we all know that the common loon is a signs of the seasons indicator species. This data, like the hawk migration data, goes into a larger public data repository where it's available to be mined by researchers asking specific questions, as well as the general public interested more broadly in the phenomenon of migration. So now let's turn to the crux to the issue where we do species interactive research. How are the birds' species changing, and how can we address and adapt to these changes given those environmental stressors that I pointed out way back at the beginning of this presentation? Like other coastal environments in the eastern US and Canada, here on the Scudic Peninsula, we witness a confluence of two phenomena in the fall. The arrival of migrant songbirds, which stop here on their way south to refuel on available insects, and the production of hundreds of thousands of berries on a variety of shrub species. It's no coincidence that these processes coincide. In particular, the birds need fruit to stock up on sugars and antioxidants in order to metabolize fuel for their long flight south, while the plants require the birds to disperse their seeds. So I don't want to get too far into the weeds, but I think this is a pretty simple explanation where we're looking to fall distribution of fruit with respect to bird migration timing. Historically, each autumn, peak songbird migration has aligned with the ripening of fruits as depicted on the left side of the slide. However, as the climate warms, plants flower earlier, pollinating insects emerge and visit those plants earlier, and the warming leads to fruit ripening earlier. Meanwhile, birds are migrating south pretty much during the same window or time frame, and sometimes a bit later. So if fruits are ripening earlier and birds are coming through on their migration later, birds may be gambling that there will be available nutrient-rich fruits on which to refuel for their continued flight south. If the timing is off, as depicted on the right side of the slide, a phenological mismatch occurs. This inability to find and consume the preferred food at the critical time can be catastrophic to a particular bird species or a suite of bird species. So this line of research, the match or potential for mismatch between fall migrating birds and their food resources, quantifies the availability of fruits on 8 plant species that we've chosen to look at here on the Scudic Peninsula on 2 different study sites. So citizen science volunteers from Earthwatch come here for about a new group each week for about a 12-week period through the summer into the fall. And they've been tracking these plants, the listed plants above, since 2014. They record the phenological data for all of those species over that time frame. The volunteers also assist with banding birds and collecting bird fecal samples. There is no better way to assess what the birds are eating than to be looking at the fecal samples. And so our field technicians, some of them get to do that particular intriguing work, if you will. The volunteers also collect insects, and we ascertain the volume of insect biomass available to the migrant songbirds in any given fall. In addition to the study sites at Scudic, we have extended the geographical reach of this project with partner organizations to gain a larger regional picture of fruit and insect phenology and availability and volume of migratory bird traffic, so to speak. So you can see here depicted in the slide, Scudic Institute, just a little bit below center and to the right, and then our other partners such as Fields Pond Audubon Center, folks from the Blue Hill Heritage Trust down to over to our west, and folks at the Maine Coastal Islands National Wildlife Refuge, the Hollingsworth Trail. And new partners are coming onto this as they get wind of this project going on. These new partners bring an interest in additional species of plants to monitor. Our original 8 monitored species has now grown to some 20 plant species. Gaining an understanding of the dietary needs of migratory birds may be crucial from a land management perspective. Studies like this inform property owners and plant landscaping businesses as to what native species will attract and benefit wildlife the best. We are also helping those partners to set up their own phenological trails. So this is basically picking a trail along which plants will be monitored. The plants are marked with special identification tags. Visitors then to those trails, as well as dedicated organizational volunteers, will now have the opportunity perspective regarding the species interactions that I've outlined above. To that end, we have set up a series of free trainings, which will take place here at the Scudic Institute this summer. These trainings are open to everyone. I should also mention that as part of a collaborative plan between us and Earthwatch and these same partner organizations that now have established these phenological trails, Earthwatch groups will go out to the partner field sites to assist with phenology trail monitoring. In this way, folks from around the world that come to Scudic as an Earthwatch volunteer will now work together with our local project volunteers. This is our best example of how phenology studies are spreading throughout the Acadia region, and at the same time, training phenology ambassadors across the continent and beyond. So we're rounding the corner toward the end. And what we do, ultimately, all the data is combined and analyzed, which informs conceptual models and helps us to do predictive modeling, such as assessing phenological match or mismatch. And that begins to define and inform potential resource and threat assessments, such as invasive plants that may be crowding out our native fruit-bearing plant species. And then this provides guidance to create resource management plans and actions, such as drafting policy at the national park regarding invasive species management. These sort of management strategies then can extend out to our partner organizations and help to do land management across the region. The data also generates predictive models. And as an example of that, I want to finish up by showing you some signs of the season's indicator bird species. During 2017, New England Signs of the Seasons observers submitted over 11,000 phenophase data sheets for 3 relatively easy to identify common birds that serve as indicator species. In a recently published study of birds and climate change in our national parks that was principally done by Audubon, the projected fate of 143 of the birds in Acadia National Park is revealed. These 3 key species are included. So let's take a little bit deeper look at a couple of climate scenarios projected for these species. Birds, as you know, are useful indicators of ecological change because they are highly mobile and generally conspicuous. As climate in a particular place changes, suitability of habitat and survival may worsen for some species and improve for others. Using internationally recognized greenhouse gas emissions pathways, researchers have mapped each bird's future climate suitability in our national parks, and in this case, these 3 species in Acadia National Park. By 2050, as temperatures increase, boreal songbirds like the bay-breasted warblers and boreal chickadees may be extirpated and moved to cooler forests north of the park. At the same time, Acadia's waters are poised to grow more crowded, both with visitation, with eutrophication, and with other species crowding in. Waterbirds, like the American bittern and pied-billed grebe, might skip their southbound migrations entirely and choose to winter in Maine instead. And our beloved common loon may no longer nest in the park. On average, 1/4 of bird species found in our national park could be completely different by 2050 if carbon emissions continue at their current pace. This research, again, led by the National Audubon Society and National Park Service, underscores the need to safeguard and manage protected lands for birds and wildlife in a changing world. Some U.S. birds are already altering their behavior and distribution in response to these shifts in temperature and rainfall caused by climate change. In this research, Audubon scientists defined the climate suitability, the range of temperatures, precipitation, and seasonal shifts for our 3 indicator species to survive. The summer trend of climate suitability for common loon and ruby-throated hummingbird is not good. While the American robin is projected to be able to adapt and thrive. The winter trend contrasts the summer stuff with the winter trend, which indicates that loons will continue to be found wintering along the Maine coast, while the ruby-throated hummingbird had insufficient data to actually make any sort of predictions. And lastly, the American robin, already a species that can be seen in any month of the year, as depicted in the bar charts above in green, may be a bit more numerous and widespread across the state in winter as we advance towards that future. It's my hope that the information I've shared with you today stimulates your inquisitiveness and motivates you to continue to make observations if you already are doing so, or jumpstarts you to get involved if you have yet to engage. Your observations matter. Done well and according to protocol, your observations are of the caliber that easily become research grade. What that means is your observations are available for use by researchers and resource managers alike. In this way, your efforts, our efforts, can help shape and solve some of those unfolding mysteries of the future. And with that, I thank you for your time and attention this afternoon, and I thank all of our partner organizations, most of which are depicted here in this final slide. So thanks a bunch, and happy to entertain your questions.
Thank you, Seth. That was an excellent presentation. I wish I lived closer to Schoodic. It was wonderful. So I need to get, okay, we do have one question. Elizabeth, I'm going to let you
Sure.
do this part.
So really quick before I jump into the questions, I just want to let everyone who is viewing on Zoom know that if you move your cursor around, you should have a menu at the bottom that has a little box that says chat. And if you click on that, you can type in a message to everyone or directly to me, Elizabeth, and you can add your questions there. So we already have a question from Colleen, who is asking if, Seth, if you can recommend a good pair of binoculars that she can use with children.
Yeah, so that's a very good question. Thank you, Colleen. The trick with binoculars, what we've done here at the Institute is I sort of researched binoculars, and of course, everything we do here has a budget. And so the first and foremost thing that you need to do is figure out how much money you really want to spend. And the more you can spend, the better the optics you can purchase. Though in our case, we were able to get a, buy 6 and get an extra 6 for basically a 50% off deal. So I was able to get a dozen binoculars for, half the price. And I went to some of these online, I'm sort of reticent to say this, but I went to some online sites where I looked at the binoculars within the framework of the budget that I could afford. And I would suggest that you look at traditional binocular names such as Nikon. A newer one is called Vortex. I would stay away from anything that looks like it's plastic and a toy. And I'm finding with children as in first grade children, what are they, 5 or 6? They actually can use binoculars carefully if they're well attended. Like an adult is helping. They can help see things. I also use a spotting scope when I take kids out and try to get them to zero in on that robin that's just sitting there or hopping across the lawn, looking for the worm. And I think what's more important than the actual binocular that you select is turning kids on to being able to see stuff. That can happen with the naked eye. That can happen with a spotting scope, and it can happen with they don't have to be the best top of the line binoculars, but just binoculars that you yourself would use, that you can easily get the birds into focus and show kids. It has to be something that kids can wield and use easily. And so I'm sorry to say I don't have a specific make or model in mind. I would keep the magnification sort of on the lower end, such as a 7, a 6 or 7 or an 8. And the one caveat I would throw at you is that when you divide the magnification into the objective lens, the width of the lens at the end of the tube that looks out at the bird, you want that number. So if you have a pair of 7 by 35 binoculars, you're dividing 7 into 35 and you come out with 5. That's the light factor. You never want to get a binocular that has a light factor less than 4. So some of these compact binoculars that would be easy for kids to handle are something like a 10 by 25 only has a light factor of 2.5. And what that means is when you look out into the daylight, the optics, the quality of those optics are only gathering so much light. The higher the light factor, the more light that's gathered, the more light that comes to your eye, the better off you are at seeing the colors of the object that you're observing. So sorry for the lengthy lecture-y kind of a response, but there you go. And if you want more specific information, you can email me at sbenz@scudicinstitute.org, and I can help you out further that way. Thanks for the question. Sorry for the ramble.
No, that's okay. That's a lot of really great things to think about. So another question here is, are there other future climate model predictions for some of our other iconic species that you, similar to the ones that you showed for the 3 signs of the seasons bird species?
Absolutely. With respect to birds, if you go to audubon.org and look up changes in our national parks, bird changes in our national parks, you can dig into that information. There's a whole PDF on Acadia there, and it tells us that there are currently 143 birds in Acadia National Park in the summertime. And then it makes predictions that are called extirpations, meaning things get worse for some. I think it's 60 of the 143, if I remember the statistics well. And then in the winter, a lesser amount are affected. But yeah, you can really dig into that study. It's actually a really good one to look at. And then if you have a favorite national park elsewhere other than Acadia, and we know that Acadia is your favorite national park, you can look at this study that has projected these kinds of futures across the U.S. anyway.
And can you say that website one more time?
Well, simply audubon.org is the simplest way to say that. So www.audubon.org, and then you should come to a big screen with like 6 or 7 bigger squares that have different studies to look at, and you just look for the one that says changing birds in our national parks, and click on that, and you'll find all the information you could possibly want. There's of 143 species. There's rose-breasted grosbeak. I can't think of any other birds. No, there's quite a lot of birds to look at, from hawks, eagles, all those sorts of things.
Great. And another question here is, are there any upcoming bird banding events in Maine which volunteers can attend and help out?
So you'd have to, I'm not sure if the Biodiversity Research Institute, which does spring monitoring, spring banding, I think at times they have a public day or maybe a couple of days where the public can go out and see what's going on, and there are opportunities to get involved. Our banding that I spoke of here only occurs in the fall. And what I would encourage folks to do would be to watch our website for those. When we do have some events open to the public where we'd like the public to understand more about what we're doing, and then we could have you out. But none of those are planned for 2018 at this particular moment in time. So I don't know of any specific places at this stage of the game in the springtime where you can go specifically. Again, if I have a little time to research that, I might be able to provide that information. So please, if you would, email me again, sbenz@scudicinstitute.org, and I'll try to get you that information directly.
We also have a quick comment from Robin, who's at Hurricane Island, who says that Hurricane Island, which you can find at hurricaneisland.net, offers bird banding courses, and they have 2 coming up in July this summer. So that's another option potentially for people who are near hurricane. So,
yes, I just like to do the shout out to Robin and say thank you. Sorry, I spaced out that you guys are doing that, and thank you for mentioning that. That's really important. Taking a course in bird banding is a little bit different than just visiting, but I would certainly encourage that, and please go see our friends at Hurricane Island.
okay, and another question, this one is from Esperanza, and she's asking, should we be thinking of having a statewide phenology gathering or conference for New England?
Is that question directed at me? That's for everybody, isn't it?
I don't know, it sounds like fun to me, so I'm game, but.
Yeah, I would echo your response.
Well, it just seems like there is so much going on that it may be time to have a gathering of all the people who are involved in all of these different programs and phenology as well.
Yeah, absolutely. And there's some new citizen science opportunities coming online. Audubon just started a new one called Climate Watch, and they're zeroing in on the bluebirds across the continent and nuthatches across the continent. So for us here in the Northeast, of course, that would be red-breasted and white-breasted nuthatch in the nuthatch clan, and eastern bluebird in the bluebird clan. And although the protocol for that is much more rigorous than anything that we have in terms of signs of seasons or even of the stuff that we do here. It's more along the lines of the Breeding Bird Atlas is another citizen science project. I mean, we're looking to get 4,000 volunteers. The first Breeding Bird Atlas done back in the late 70s had just 200 people. This one is designed to gather in 4,000 volunteers, and you don't have to be an expert. We want people looking in their backyards for robin nests, for phoebe nests, for whatever they can find without being terribly intrusive of the bird species itself. But we really, really need people, and I would direct you to the Maine Birding Atlas, which you can find at the Maine Inland Fisheries and Wildlife website.
Yeah, I'm glad you mentioned that, Seth, because I've had several people asking about that. It's a great resource.